The fence post splintered under my weight before I even realized what was happening. One moment I was reaching for the barbed wire. Next I was crashing through rotted wood and landing hard in a tangle of metal and mud. Pain shot through my right leg like lightning, sharp and immediate. And when I tried to move, my body refused to cooperate. The wire had caught my jeans, twisted around my thigh in a way that made my stomach turn. I couldn't straighten my leg. I couldn't close my legs together. The position was awkward, vulnerable, and getting more painful by the second. "Damn it," I muttered, trying to assess the damage without moving too much. Blood was already seeping through the denim, dark and warm. The ranch stretched empty around me. Nothing but rolling hills and gray sky threatening rain. My truck was a quarter-mile back. My phone was sitting uselessly on the kitchen counter because I'd thought I'd only be out here for 20 minutes. 20 minutes to check the north pasture fence. That's what I'd told myself this morning when I'd left the house at dawn. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of approaching rain and the distant sound of thunder. Perfect. Just perfect. I was stuck in a fence, bleeding, unable to move properly, and a storm was rolling in. This was exactly the kind of situation my father would have laughed at, not because it was funny, but because it was the kind of stupid mistake a distracted rancher made. And I had been distracted lately, though I wasn't ready to admit why. That's when I heard it. The rumble of an engine, different from thunder, getting closer. My heart kicked up for reasons that had nothing to do with my current predicament. There was only one person who drove out this way. Only one person who had any reason to be on this access road. My chest tightened as the sound grew louder, and I cursed myself for the flush of hope that bloomed despite everything. This was not how I wanted him to find me. Not like this. Not ever, really. The truck appeared over the ridge, a beat-up Ford the color of rust and determination. It slowed when the driver spotted me, then pulled off the road with a spray of gravel. The door opened, and Marcus Kane stepped out, all 6 feet of lean muscle and concerned brown eyes. And my day somehow got infinitely better and infinitely worse at the same time. We'd been neighbors for 3 years, ever since he'd bought the adjoining property and started building his own ranch from scratch. We'd been friends for just as long, good friends, the kind who helped each other with fence repairs and shared equipment and showed up when things went wrong. But lately, something had shifted between us, something I couldn't name and didn't dare examine too closely. Ethan. His voice carried across the distance, rough with worry. Jesus, what happened? He was moving toward me before I could answer, his long stride eating up the ground between us. He wore his usual work clothes, faded jeans, a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, boots caked with the same mud that now covered me. His dark hair was longer than the last time I'd seen him, curling slightly at the edges where it brushed his collar. He needed a haircut. I noticed these things about him now, these small details that I shouldn't care about, but somehow did. "Fence gave out," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and failing. The pain was getting worse, a throbbing ache that spread from my thigh down to my knee. "Wires caught. I can't." I gestured helplessly at my legs. At the awkward angle, my right leg was twisted. At the way I was essentially trapped in the most undignified position imaginable. I can't move. Can't close my legs properly without making it worse. Marcus dropped to his knees beside me without hesitation, his hands already reaching for the twisted wire. Up close, I could smell him soap and coffee, and something earthy. That was just him, just Marcus. His shoulder brushed mine as he leaned in to examine the situation. I had to fight the urge to lean into that contact, to seek out more of his warmth. This was bad. This was really bad, and not just because of the fence. "Okay," he said softly, his breath warm against my cheek. "Okay, I've got you. Don't..." His fingers were gentle as they traced the path of the wire, careful not to jostle my leg. It's wrapped pretty tight. I'm going to need to cut it, but I have to be careful not to make the injury worse." He looked up at me then, his brown eyes dark with concern and something else, something that made my pulse jump. "This is going to hurt." "I'm sorry." "Just do it," I said, though my voice came out rougher than I intended. "I trust you." The words hung between us for a moment, weighted with more meaning than they should have carried. I trusted him with more than just this moment, more than just this injury. I trusted him in ways I'd never trusted anyone. And that terrified me more than the blood or the pain or the storm clouds gathering overhead. Marcus pulled a multi-tool from his pocket, flipping it open to reveal wire cutters. "Tell me if it gets too bad," he said, positioning the cutters carefully. "I'll stop if I need to." But we both knew he couldn't stop. We both knew he had to get me free before the storm hit, before I lost more blood, before everything got exponentially worse. So I nodded and braced myself, and he began to cut. The first snip of wire released some of the tension, but it also shifted the barbs against my skin in a way that made me gasp. Marcus's hand immediately found my shoulder, steadying me, grounding me. "Breathe," he murmured. "Just breathe, Ethan, I've got you." And he did. His presence was solid beside me, his hands sure and careful as he worked through the wire strand by strand. Each cut brought relief and fresh pain in equal measure. But through it all, Marcus was there, his voice low and constant, talking me through it. "It's almost done," he said, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. "One more piece. Then I'm going to need to look at your leg, see how bad the damage is." His jaw was tight, muscle jumping beneath the scruff of his beard. He was worried. I could see it in the set of his shoulders, in the way his hands moved with controlled precision. "Ready?" "Yeah," I breathed, and he made the final cut. The wire fell away, and my leg dropped slightly, finally able to close somewhat. Though the movement sent fresh waves of pain radiating through my thigh, I hissed through my teeth, and Marcus's hand tightened on my shoulder. "I'm okay," I said quickly, before he could ask. "I'm okay. Just give me a second." But Marcus was already shifting, already moving to examine my leg with gentle, clinical hands. "I need to see how bad this is," he said, and there was something in his voice, something strained and careful. "I'm going to have to," he gestured at my jeans, at the blood-soaked fabric. "I need to cut the denim away. Is that okay?" The question was simple. The answer should have been simple. But the thought of Marcus's hands on my bare skin, even in a medical context, even in an emergency, made something hot and confusing twist in my chest. "Yeah," I managed. "Yeah, that's fine. Do what you need to do." The knife Marcus produced from his belt was sharp and efficient, slicing through denim like butter. He worked methodically, cutting up the seam of my jeans from the knee to mid-thigh, peeling back the fabric to reveal the damage underneath. I forced myself to look at the sky instead of at him, at the darkening clouds that promised rain within the hour. But I could feel his gaze on my skin, could feel the weight of his attention like a physical touch, and it made breathing difficult for reasons that had nothing to do with pain. "It's not as bad as I feared," Marcus said finally, relief evident in his voice. "The barbs caught you in a few places, but nothing looks too deep. You're going to need stitches, though, and antibiotics. When's the last time you had a tetanus shot?" His hands were still on my leg, palm pressed against my thigh, just above the worst of the wounds. And I could feel the warmth of his skin through the thin layer of blood and dirt. 2 years ago," I said, my own voice sounding strange and distant to my ears. "After that incident with the nail in the barn, the same barn where Marcus had found me that day, where he'd driven me to the emergency room and waited with me for 3 hours because I'd asked him to, where he'd bought me terrible coffee and made jokes to distract me from the pain, and where I'd first started to realize that what I felt for him might be more than simple friendship, Good, Marcus said, though his attention was still on my leg, on the wounds that needed tending. I'm going to clean these with water from my truck, then we're going to wrap them and get you to town. The clinic should still be open. Dr. Morrison can fix you up properly. He was already moving, already standing and heading back to his truck, and I felt the loss of his presence like cold water. The rain chose that moment to start. Fat drops that splattered against my face and turned the dust to mud. Marcus returned with a first aid kit and several bottles of water, his shirt already darkening with moisture. This is going to sting, he warned, kneeling beside me again, closer this time. The rain was coming down harder now, and he positioned himself partially over me, using his body to shield me from the worst of it. It was practical. It was necessary. It meant nothing except that Marcus Kane was the kind of man who protected people, who took care of those around him without question or expectation. But my heart didn't care about practical or necessary. My heart only knew that he was close, so close I could count the drops of rain clinging to his eyelashes, and that I wanted him even closer. The water hit my wounds, and I bit back a curse, fingers digging into the mud beneath me. Marcus's free hand found mine, lacing our fingers together without comment, giving me something to hold on to that wasn't earth or pain or confusion. I know, he said softly. I know it hurts. Almost done. He worked quickly, efficiently, cleaning the worst of the blood and dirt away before applying antibiotic ointment from his kit. His touch was gentle, despite the urgency, despite the rain that was now a steady downpour around us. When he pulled out the gauze and medical tape, I found my voice again. You came prepared, I said, trying for levity and achieving something closer to breathless. Do you always carry a full trauma kit in your truck? The question was stupid, a distraction. But I needed something to focus on besides the way his hair was plastered to his forehead, besides the way his shirt clung to his shoulders, besides the fact that his hand was still holding mine. Since I met you. Marcus glanced up with a half-smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Yeah. You're kind of accident-prone, Ethan. Someone has to be ready to patch you up. The words were teasing, but there was something beneath them, something raw and honest that made my breath catch. He wrapped my leg with quick, competent movements, securing the gauze with tape before finally, reluctantly, releasing my hand. Can you stand? I can try, I said, though I wasn't sure it was true. My leg throbbed with each heartbeat, and I was soaked through, covered in mud and blood and rain. But Marcus was already there, already sliding an arm around my waist, taking most of my weight as he helped me up. The world tilted dangerously for a moment, gray sky and green hills blurring together, and I leaned heavily against him, my face pressed against his shoulder. He smelled like rain and soap and safety, and I wanted to stay there, wanted to hold on to him and never let go. I've got you, Marcus murmured, his voice close to my ear, his breath warm against my wet skin. Come on, Trucks, just over there. Think you can make it? His arm was solid around me, muscles flexing as he supported my weight, and I was abruptly, painfully aware of every point where our bodies touched. My side against his ribs, my arm over his shoulders, his hands splayed across my back, fingers pressing through wet fabric to the skin beneath. Yeah, I said, though my voice was unsteady. Yeah, I can make it. We moved together through the rain, an awkward three-legged shuffle across the muddy ground. Each step sent jolts of pain up my leg, but Marcus kept me steady, kept me upright, murmuring encouragement the whole way. By the time we reached his truck, I was breathing hard, and he was supporting almost all my weight. But we made it. He opened the passenger door and helped me inside, buckling my seatbelt with hands that shook slightly. You're drenched, I observed stupidly, stating the obvious because my brain had apparently stopped functioning properly. Marcus was soaked, his shirt transparent in places, his jeans dark with water. He should have been cold. He should have been uncomfortable. Instead, he just looked at me with those dark eyes, and something that might have been exasperation, or might have been affection, or might have been something I didn't dare name. "So are you," he pointed out, then slammed the door and jogged around to the driver's side. The heater roared to life as soon as he started the engine, blasting warm air that smelled like dust and oil. Marcus pulled off his flannel shirt, revealing a t-shirt underneath that clung to his chest and arms in ways that I absolutely should not be noticing right now. He tossed the flannel at me. "Put that on. You're shivering."
I was.
I hadn't realized it until he mentioned it, but I was trembling. Fine shivers that had as much to do with adrenaline and shock as with cold. I pulled his shirt on over my own wet t-shirt, and it was warm from his body heat. Soft from 100 washings, and it smelled like him. I pulled it tighter around myself and tried not to think about what that meant, about why that mattered, about why I was more affected by his shirt than by the injury to my leg. The drive to town should have taken 30 minutes. Marcus made it in 20, pushing his truck harder than was probably wise on rain-slicked roads, his jaw tight with concentration. He didn't talk much, just kept glancing over at me every few minutes, as if checking to make sure I was still conscious, still breathing, still there. And I was there, hyper-aware of everything, the rumble of the engine, the squeak of windshield wipers, the way Marcus's hands gripped the steering wheel. White-knuckled and tense. "You didn't have to do this," I said finally, breaking the silence that had stretched between us. "You could have just called an ambulance." Could have, but Marcus cut me off with a sharp look, his eyes flashing in the dim light of the cab. "Shut up, Ethan," he said. And there was an edge to his voice I'd never heard before, something fierce and almost angry. "You were hurt. You were alone. There was no decision to make. There was only getting to you and making sure you were okay." He turned his attention back to the road, but his hands had tightened on the wheel, and I could see the muscle jumping in his jaw again. "Don't thank me for doing what anyone would do." But it wasn't what anyone would do. It was what Marcus would do, because he was Marcus. Because he cared in a way that went beyond neighborly obligation or casual friendship. And I wanted to tell him that. I wanted to explain that I knew the difference, that I understood what it meant. But the words stuck in my throat, tangled up with all the other things I couldn't say.
All the field.
I'd been pushing down for months now. So instead, I just nodded and pulled his shirt tighter and watched the rain streak across the windows as we drove toward town. Dr. Morrison was exactly as I remembered, efficient. No nonsense, and completely unimpressed by the dramatic circumstances of my injury. She took one look at my leg, asked Marcus to wait in the lobby, and got to work with the kind of brisk competence that left no room for embarrassment or discomfort. The stitches hurt, sharp tugs that made me grit my teeth. But she talked me through it with the same calm voice she'd used when I was 10 and had broken my arm falling out of a tree. "You're lucky," she said as she worked, her gloved hands steady. "These could have been much worse. Another inch to the left, and you might have hit the femoral artery. As it is, you'll be sore for a few weeks, but there shouldn't be any permanent damage." She glanced up at me, her gray eyes sharp behind her glasses. "Marcus said you were caught in a fence. Alone? Ethan, you know better than that. You never work fences alone, especially the old ones." "I know," I admitted, feeling like a kid being scolded for running with scissors. I wasn't planning to do any repairs. I was just checking the line. The post gave out before I could react. It sounded like an excuse even to my own ears, a justification for carelessness. The truth was, I'd been distracted. I'd been thinking about Marcus, about the way he'd looked 3 days ago when he'd stopped by to return a borrowed tool, about the way he'd smiled at something I'd said, about the way my heart had kicked up just from seeing his truck coming down the drive. Dr. Morrison hummed noncommittally. finishing the last stitch and covering the wounds with clean bandages. Well, you're fortunate Marcus came along when he did. That young man seems to have a knack for being in the right place at the right time where you're concerned. There was something knowing in her tone, something that made heat climb up my neck. He was quite worried about you. Didn't want to leave you even to come back here. I had to practically order him to the waiting room. The image of Marcus pacing in the lobby, worried about me, made something warm bloom in my chest. "He's a good friend," I said, testing the words, seeing how they felt in my mouth. They felt insufficient. They felt like a lie wrapped in truth, like trying to describe the ocean by calling it damp. But I didn't have better words. Didn't know how to explain what Marcus was to me when I barely understood it myself. "MMHM, Dr. Morrison said, in a tone that suggested she had her own opinions on the matter but was too professional to share them. "Well, your good friend is going to need to keep an eye on you for the next few days. These wounds need to stay clean and dry. No heavy lifting, no strenuous activity. I'm prescribing antibiotics and pain medication. Take them as directed." She stripped off her gloves and made notes on her tablet. "I want to see you back here in a week to check the stitches. If anything looks infected, redness, swelling, fever, you come back immediately." "Understood?" "Understood," I agreed, and let her help me off the examination table. My leg was stiff and sore, the local anesthetic already starting to wear off, but it was manageable. I could walk, albeit with a slight limp. Dr. Morrison provided me with crutches anyway, insisted I use them for at least the first few days, and sent me back out to the lobby where Marcus was indeed pacing his phone in his hand, his wet hair standing up in places like he'd been running his fingers through it. He looked up when I emerged, and the relief that washed over his face was almost painful to witness. "Hey," he said, crossing to me in 3 long strides. "How bad is it?" "What did she say?" His hands hovered near me, not quite touching, as if he wasn't sure where he was allowed to put them. What was acceptable now that the immediate emergency was over? 12 stitches, I said, managing what I hoped was a reassuring smile. "Antibiotics, pain meds, light duty for a couple weeks. She says I'll be fine." I lifted the crutches slightly. "I'm supposed to use these for a few days. And I need to keep the wounds clean and dry, which means no ranch work until she clears me." Marcus's expression shifted from relief to something more complicated, concern mixed with determination.
Oh.
Mixed with something that looked almost like guilt. "Okay," he said slowly. "Okay, that's manageable. You're staying with me?" The statement was flat, matter of fact, as if there were no other possible option. No arguments. "Your place is a 1/4 mile from mine. You're injured, and someone needs to make sure you're following doctor's orders. I've got a spare room." It's settled. "Marcus," I started, but he cut me off with a look. I said, "No arguments, Ethan. You can't take care of a ranch in your condition, and you sure as hell can't take care of yourself. I'm not letting you go home alone to that empty house where you'll immediately ignore every instruction the doctor gave you and hurt yourself worse trying to do too much." He grabbed my elbow gently, steering me toward the exit. "Come on. We'll stop by your place and get you some clothes and whatever else you need. Then you're coming home with me." The word home resonated in my chest. A bell struck that wouldn't stop ringing. Marcus's home. Marcus's spare room. Days or weeks of being under the same roof, of proximity and forced closeness, and all the complications that came with it. I should have argued. I should have insisted I'd be fine alone. But the truth was, I didn't want to be alone. I wanted to be wherever Marcus was, had wanted it for months now, and this injury had just given me an excuse I couldn't refuse. "Fine," I said, letting him guide me out into the parking lot where the rain had finally stopped, leaving everything washed clean and smelling of wet earth. but I'm cooking once I'm mobile again. Fair warning, I make a mean pot roast. It was a weak attempt at humor, at normalcy, but Marcus smiled anyway. That real smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes and made my heart do stupid. Complicated things, Dealey said, and helped me into the truck. Marcus's house was exactly what I'd expected, a ranch style with clean lines and practical design. Nothing fancy but well-maintained and clearly lived in. He'd built most of it himself over the past 2 years, working nights and weekends while he got his land operation up and running. I'd helped him with some of the framing, with the roof, with a dozen small projects that gave me excuses to be around him. The result was a home that felt like Marcus, solid, warm, unpretentious, and surprisingly comfortable. The spare room was on the ground floor, just down the hall from the master bedroom and across from a bathroom. It had a double bed with a navy quilt, a dresser, a small desk by the window. Simple, functional. But when Marcus set my bag down on the bed and turned to face me, the space suddenly felt too small, too intimate, too charged with things neither of us was saying. I changed the sheets this morning, he said, which was probably a lie told to make me feel less like an imposition. Bathrooms across the hall. Towels are in the closet. If you need anything, medication, water, help with anything, my room's just there. He gestured vaguely down the hall. Don't be stubborn about asking, okay? That's the whole point of you being here. I'll try, I promised, though we both knew my track record with asking for help was less than stellar. I'd been taking care of myself since my father died 5 years ago. Running the ranch alone, proving to everyone, including myself, that I could handle it. Asking for help felt like admitting weakness, like acknowledging I couldn't do everything myself. But standing here in Marcus's spare room, my leg throbbing, despite the pain medication, I had to admit that maybe sometimes I needed to let people in. Marcus lingered in the doorway, his shoulder against the frame, his eyes on me with an intensity that made my skin feel too tight. You scared me today, he said quietly, and the admission hung between us like smoke. When I came over that ridge and saw you on the ground, saw the blood, he stopped, shook his head. I've never driven that fast in my life. All I could think was that I had to get to you, had to make sure you were okay. And if you weren't, another pause, longer this time, waited with things he wasn't saying. But I am okay, I said, though my voice came out softer than intended. You made sure of that. You got there in time. You took care of me? I wanted to cross the room, wanted to close the distance between us and touch him, reassure him in ways that went beyond words. But I stayed where I was, leaning on my crutches, caught between what I wanted and what I knew I should do. This time, Marcus said, and there was something raw in his expression. Something that looked like fear and frustration, and something else I couldn't name. This time I got there. But what about next time? What about all the times you're out there alone, doing dangerous work, taking risks you shouldn't take? He pushed off the doorframe, took a single step into the room. You can't keep doing this, Ethan. You can't keep acting like you don't need anyone, like you're invincible. You're not. Today proved that. I know I'm not invincible, I shot back. Defensive now because he was touching on truths I didn't want to examine, fears I'd been avoiding. I know I need help sometimes. Why do you think I agreed to stay here? Why do you think I called you first when I needed fence repairs last month? I'm not, I broke off, frustrated with myself, with this conversation, the way everything between us had gotten so complicated without either of us acknowledging it. You're not what? Marcus pressed, and he was closer now, just a few feet away, his eyes dark and intense in the fading evening light. Not what, Ethan? Tell me. There was a challenge in his voice, an invitation to honesty that terrified me more than any physical injury ever could. Because if I told him the truth, if I admitted what I was really afraid of, there would be no taking it back. everything would change. And maybe he'd walk away. Maybe he'd look at me differently. Maybe I'd lose the one person who mattered most. I'm not good at this, I admitted finally, gesturing between us with one crutch. At letting people in, at asking for help, I swallowed hard, forced myself to continue. At being around you without wanting, but I couldn't finish that sentence. Couldn't say out loud that being around Marcus had become both the best and worst part of my days, that I looked for excuses to see him, that I thought about him constantly, that I'd been half in love with him for months and didn't know what to do about it. Marcus went very still. Every line of his body tense with attention. Without wanting what? He asked, and his voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. Finish the sentence. Ethan, please. The please broke something open in my chest. Made the truth bubble up despite all my carefully constructed defenses. Out. Without wanting more than you're willing to give, I said, and the words came out rushed and raw and painfully honest. Without wanting to touch you in ways friends don't touch, without wondering what it would be like to, I stopped myself, shook my head. I'm sorry. Forget I said anything. It's the pain medication talking. I'm not thinking straight. But Marcus was already moving, closing the distance between us with determined strides. He stopped just in front of me, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Close enough to see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. What if I want that too? He said, and the question hit me like a physical blow. What if I've wanted that for months? What if every time I come up with an excuse to see you, it's because I can't stay away? What if watching you bleed today made me realize I can't keep pretending this is just friendship? My heart was hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. Marcus's name came out like a prayer, like a question, like a plea for clarity in a moment that felt simultaneously too real and completely impossible. What are you saying? I'm saying I care about you, Marcus said, and he lifted one hand, hesitated, then gently touched my face, his palm warm against my jaw. I'm saying that you scare me because I care too much. I'm saying that I don't want to just be your neighbor or your friend or the guy who patches you up when you're hurt. He stopped, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone in a gesture so tender it made my breath catch. I want to be the person you call first. The person you trust most? The person you come home to. The crutches fell from my hands, clattering to the floor as I reached for him. As I closed the last few inches between us and pulled him into a kiss that was probably too desperate, too fierce to revealing of just how long I'd been wanting this. But Marcus met me there, his arms coming around me carefully, mindful of my injury, holding me like I was something precious and fragile and worth protecting. His lips were soft and firm and perfect, moving against mine with a hunger that matched my own. And the kiss tasted like rain and hope and everything I'd been too afraid to dream about. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against mine. I've wanted to do that for so long, he murmured, his hands still framing my face, his thumbs stroking along my jaw. Every time I saw you. Every time you smiled at me. Every time you asked for my help, like it cost you something to admit you needed it. I wanted to kiss you and tell you it was okay, that I was here, that I wasn't going anywhere. Why didn't you? I asked, my own hands fisted in his shirt, holding him close because I was afraid if I let go, this moment would evaporate like morning dew. Why didn't you say something? Because I didn't want to risk losing you, Marcus admitted, echoing my own fears back at me. Because I didn't want to risk losing you, Marcus admitted, echoing my own fears back at me. I didn't want to make things weird between us if you didn't feel the same way. And I kept telling myself I was imagining things, that you just saw me as a friend, that I was reading too much into every look and touch and moment we shared. But today, when I found you hurt and all I could think about was getting to you, making sure you were okay, he pulled back slightly, just enough to meet my eyes. I realized I couldn't keep lying to myself. Life's too short. Things are too uncertain. If something had happened to you today and I'd never told you how I felt, nothing happened, I interrupted gently, threading my fingers through his hair because I could. Because he'd kissed me, because apparently he wanted me to. I'm here. You're here. And we're both apparently terrible at recognizing feelings when they're staring us in the face. A slightly hysterical laugh bubbled up. How long have we been dancing around this? Months, Marcus said. Maybe since the beginning. I don't know. All I know is that you moved in next door and started asking me for advice about your fences. And I found excuses to stop by with equipment I didn't really need to lend you. And somewhere in there, between fence repairs and shared meals and late-night conversations on your porch, I fell for you. Hard. The confession settled in my chest, warm and precious, and terrifying in its honesty. I fell for you too, I said, needing him to know, needing to match his vulnerability with my own. I tried not to. I told myself it was just friendship, just gratitude, just anything but what it actually was. But then you'd show up and everything would feel better, feel right, and I couldn't keep pretending anymore. Marcus smiled, that full, genuine smile that transformed his entire face, and kissed me again. This kiss was slower, gentler, a promise rather than a desperate claim. When he pulled back, his eyes were soft. You need to rest, he said, practical even now. Doctor's orders. But we're going to talk about this, about us, about what this means. Soon, okay? Okay, I agreed, though everything in me protested the idea of letting him go, spending even a few hours apart when we just found this thing between us. But my leg was starting to throb in earnest, and exhaustion was pulling at me with heavy hands. Marcus seemed to sense this, bending to retrieve my fallen crutches and handing them to me with a look that was part concern, part affection. Part heat that promised more conversations and more kisses and more everything once I was healed. Get some sleep, he said, backing toward the door. I'll check on you in a few hours. If you need anything before then, I'll call, I promised. And watched him leave. Watched the door close behind him. And stood there in the gathering darkness with my heart still racing and my lips still tingling and the certain knowledge that everything had just changed in the best possible way. The next 3 days passed in a blur of medication, rest, and moments of almost unbearable domestic intimacy. Marcus took care of me with the same quiet competence he brought to everything, making sure I took my antibiotics on schedule, bringing me meals in bed when standing was too difficult, helping me to the bathroom with a matter-of-fact gentleness that should have been embarrassing, but somehow wasn't. And through it all, there were small touches, his hand on my shoulder, fingers brushing mine when he passed me a glass of water, the press of his lips against my forehead when he thought I was sleeping. We talked too. Long conversations that stretched late into the night, Marcus sitting on the edge of my bed or pulled up in the desk chair, sharing stories about our pasts, our fears, our dreams. I learned that he'd always known he was gay, had come out to his family at 16 and been met with a mix of acceptance and awkwardness that eventually smoothed into normalcy. I told him about my own slower realization, about the confusion and fear that had defined my teenage years, about the decision to leave it all unexamined while I focused on keeping my father's ranch running after his death. I think I always knew. I admitted one night when the pain medication had loosened my tongue and the darkness made honesty easier, but I didn't want to know. Didn't want to complicate things when I was already struggling to keep everything together. So I just didn't think about it. Didn't date. Didn't do anything that would force me to confront it. Marcus's hand found mine in the darkness, lacing our fingers together. And now? He asked softly. Are you ready to think about it now? Yeah, I said, squeezing his hand. Yeah, I think I am. I think I have to be. because ignoring it didn't make it go away. It just made me lonely. The admission cost me something. But Marcus accepted it with the same gentle understanding he'd shown everything else. Raising my hand to his lips and kissing my knuckles in a gesture that was somehow more intimate than any of the kisses we'd shared by the fourth day, I was restless and uncomfortable. Tired of being an invalid, tired of being waited on, tired of the confines of the bedroom, no matter how comfortable Marcus had made it. When he came in with breakfast that morning, I was already up, dressed in sweatpants and a t-shirt, attempting to navigate with just one crutch. "What are you doing?" Marcus asked, setting the tray down with a frown. "You're supposed to be resting." "I've been resting for 3 days," I pointed out. "I'm going stir-crazy. I need to move around. Need to do something other than lie in bed watching the ceiling. Please, Marcus. Just let me sit in the living room. Let me feel like a person instead of a patient." I tried for pitiful, but probably just looked stubborn, because that's what Marcus's expression suggested phoned, exasperation mixed with resignation. "Fine," he said, "but you're taking both crutches, and I'm helping you to the couch, and you're keeping that leg elevated. Non-negotiable." He helped me down the hall, his arm around my waist for support, and got me settled on his worn leather couch, with my leg propped on pillows and a blanket tucked around me. The living room was warm and lived in, with morning light streaming through the windows and the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. It felt infinitely better than the bedroom. Felt like being part of the house instead of isolated from it. Marcus disappeared into the kitchen and returned with 2 mugs of coffee, settling into the armchair across from me rather than beside me, maintaining a careful distance that felt wrong after the intimacy of the past few days. I frowned at him over the rim of my mug. "Why are you sitting all the way over there?" "Because if I sit next to you, I'm going to want to touch you," Marcus said bluntly, his eyes meeting mine with uncomfortable honesty. "And if I touch you, I'm going to want to kiss you. And if I kiss you, I'm not going to want to stop. And you're injured and need to focus on healing, not on me being unable to keep my hands to myself." The confession was delivered matter-of-factly, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers tightened around his mug. Heat flooded through me that had nothing to do with the coffee, or the blanket, or the morning sun. "What if I want you to touch me?" I asked, my voice dropping to something low and intimate. "What if I've been going crazy the past 3 days with you being close, but not close enough? What if the only thing I've been thinking about is when you're going to kiss me again?" Marcus's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening. "Ethan," my name was half warning, half plea. "You're hurt." "I'm not going to, we can't," but he was already standing, already crossing to the couch, already kneeling beside me with careful, deliberate movements. "I don't want to hurt you." "You won't," I said, reaching for him, my hand sliding into his hair to pull him closer. "You could never hurt me, Marcus. Not the way you mean." And then he was kissing me again, his lips soft and searching, his hand cupping my face with exquisite gentleness. The kiss deepened slowly, a gradual building of heat and need that left me breathless and aching for more. But Marcus kept it controlled, kept it careful, breaking away before things could progress beyond kissing. "We're taking this slow," he said firmly, even as his thumb traced my lower lip with obvious want. "You're still healing. And when he started again. "I want you fully healed and completely sure before we take this anywhere beyond kissing. Understand?" I understood, even as frustration and desire warred within me. I understood that Marcus was being responsible, was putting my well-being first, was refusing to take advantage of the situation. And I loved him for it, even as I wanted to argue, wanted to insist I was fine, wanted to pull him onto the couch beside me and damn the consequences. "Okay," I agreed, because it was the right answer, even if it wasn't the answer I wanted to give. "Slow. I can do slow." Marcus smiled, kissed me once more quickly, then retreated back to his chair before either of us could change our minds. "Tell me about your ranch," he said, clearly changing the subject to safer ground. "What needs to be done while you're laid up? I can handle the basics for both our places. But if there's anything specific," we spent the rest of the morning making lists and planning. Marcus taking notes on his phone while I directed from the couch. It was peaceful, domestic, comfortable in a way that made my chest ache with something deeper than desire. This was what I wanted, I realized. Not just the physical intimacy, not just the romance, but this partnership, this ease of being together, this sense of building something with someone who understood me. A week into my stay at Marcus's house, things had settled into a comfortable routine. My leg was healing well, according to Dr. Morrison. The stitches were holding, and I'd graduated from 2 crutches to 1. I was still staying with Marcus, though my reasons for not going home had shifted from medical necessity to simple preference. Neither of us had discussed me leaving. Neither of us seemed to want to address the inevitable end of this forced proximity that changed when Derek showed up. I was on the porch, enjoying the afternoon sun and working my way through email on my laptop, when a truck I didn't recognize pulled into Marcus's drive. A man I vaguely knew from town, Derek something, who ran a horse training operation on the far side of the county, stepped out and waved. He was tall, blonde, objectively handsome in a way that made my stomach clench with instant, irrational dislike. "Hey," Derek called out cheerfully as he approached. "Is Marcus around? We're supposed to discuss that gelding he's thinking about buying." He had an easy confidence, a comfortable smile, the kind of natural charisma that made people like him immediately. I hated him on sight, which was unfair and childish, and I didn't care. "He's in the barn," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I can show you," but Derek was already heading in that direction, calling over his shoulder that he knew the way. And I was left on the porch feeling territorial and possessive and slightly ridiculous. Marcus could talk to whoever he wanted, could buy horses from whoever he wanted, could smile at handsome blonde trainers without it meaning anything. Except my chest was tight with anxiety. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to lose something I'd barely just claimed. They were gone for over an hour. I tried to focus on work, tried to ignore the voice in my head whispering doubts and fears and questions about Marcus's past, about whether Derek was just a horse trainer or something more. When they finally emerged from the barn, they were laughing about something. And Derek's hand was on Marcus's shoulder in a familiar gesture that made jealousy spike hot and acidic in my gut. I watched as they said their goodbyes. As Derek gave Marcus what looked like a business card, as Marcus smiled that warm, genuine smile and promised to call soon, then Derek was driving away, and Marcus was turning toward the house, and his expression shifted when he caught sight of me on the porch. The smile faded, replaced by something more cautious, more questioning. "Hey," he said, climbing the steps to stand beside me. "How long have you been out here?" "Long enough," I said, and the words came out sharper than intended, edged with the jealousy I was trying and failing to contain. "Derek seems nice, friendly. You two seem to get along well." I heard the accusation in my tone, the implied question, and hated myself for it. Marcus hadn't done anything wrong. This was my issue, my insecurity, my fear, making me act like an idiot. Marcus went still, his eyes searching my face with uncomfortable perception. "Are you?" He stopped, started again with something that might have been amusement. "Are you jealous of Derek?" When I didn't answer immediately, he continued, "Ethan, Derek is just a horse trainer. We were discussing a potential sale. That's all." "He touched you," I said, and the words sounded petulant even to my own ears. "He was familiar with you. Like maybe he knows you better than." I couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't articulate the fear that maybe I was just a temporary thing. Maybe Marcus had other options. Maybe Derek was someone he dated, or wanted to date, or Derek is married, Marcus interrupted gently, kneeling beside my chair so we were eye level, happily married to a woman with 2 kids. And even if he wasn't, even if he was single and interested, it wouldn't matter, because I'm not interested in him. I'm interested in you. He reached up to cut my face, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone. Only you. There's no competition here, Ethan. There's no one else I'm looking at or thinking about. Just you. The reassurance helped, but the insecurity remained. A persistent whisper that told me I wasn't enough. That this was too good to be real. That eventually Marcus would realize he could do better. I don't like feeling this way, I admitted quietly. I don't like being the kind of person who gets jealous over nothing. But I saw him touch you, saw you smile at him, and I shook my head, frustrated with myself. I'm sorry. This is stupid. It's not stupid, Marcus said firmly. It's honest. And I get it. If I saw someone touching you like they had a right to, looking at you like they wanted something I thought was mine, his jaw tightened, I wouldn't handle it well either. But you need to trust me. Trust that when I say you're the one I want, I mean it. Trust that I'm not looking elsewhere, because I already found what I was looking for. His words wrapped around the fear, soothing it even as part of me remained uncertain. I want to trust that, I said honestly. I want to believe it's really this simple, but I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. For you to realize this isn't what you thought you wanted, for Marcus kissed me, cutting off the spiral of anxiety with the press of his lips, the warmth of his mouth, the solid reality of his presence. When he pulled back, his eyes were fierce. Stop borrowing trouble, he said. Stop assuming the worst. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. And if you need me to prove it, he stood, holding out his hand. Come with me. I let him pull me to my feet, let him steady me with an arm around my waist, and followed him into the house and down the hall to his bedroom. My heart was pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with exertion and everything to do with anticipation and nerves and the certain knowledge that whatever was about to happen would change things irrevocably between us. Marcus's bedroom was as understated as the rest of the house. Large bed with a wrought iron frame, dark wood furniture, curtains that filtered the afternoon light into something golden and warm. He led me to the bed, helped me sit on the edge, then knelt in front of me again, his hands resting on my thighs, his eyes serious. I want you, he said simply. No preamble, no dancing around the truth. I have wanted you for months. But I'm not going to do anything you're not ready for. So tell me, what do you want, Ethan? What do you need from me right now? The question was impossibly difficult and remarkably simple. What did I want? I wanted everything. I wanted his hands on me, his lips on mine, his body pressed against mine in ways that went beyond comfort or care. I wanted to feel desired, wanted, claimed. I wanted to stop being afraid and start being brave. You, I said, reaching for him, pulling him up and onto the bed beside me. I want you. All of you. I'm ready, Marcus. I'm sure. He searched my face for a long moment, looking for doubt or hesitation. And whatever he found must have satisfied him, because he smiled and kissed me with a heat that stole my breath. His hands were careful on my body, mindful of my injury, even as they explored, learned, discovered. And I let him, lost in the sensation, in the reality of finally having what I'd wanted for so long. Afterward, we lay tangled together in the golden afternoon light, my head on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my shoulder. I felt raw and vulnerable and happier than I'd been in years, maybe ever. Marcus pressed a kiss to my hair, his arms tightening around me. Stay, he said quietly. Not just until you're healed. Stay here. Move in properly. Let's do this, build this together. Your ranch, my ranch, all of it. Together. The offer hung in the air between us, huge and terrifying, and exactly what I wanted. Are you sure? I asked, needing to hear it, needing to know this wasn't just post-intimacy emotion talking. That's a big step. We've only just, I'm sure, Marcus interrupted. I've been sure about you for a long time. This just made it clearer. I don't want to go back to being neighbors who see each other occasionally. I don't want separate houses and separate lives. I want mornings with you. Evenings with you. Everything with you. If you want that too, I do, I said, the words feeling like a promise, like a vow, like the beginning of something I'd been searching for without knowing it. I want all of that. With you, he kissed me again, slow and sweet and full of promise. And I knew with absolute certainty that I was exactly where I was meant to be. The next few weeks were a blur of healing, adjustment, and learning to navigate this new reality we'd created. My leg continued to improve, the stitches came out on schedule, and Dr. Morrison cleared me for light work. Marcus and I fell into patterns of domesticity that felt natural despite their newness, sharing cooking duties. Working our ranches in tandem. Ending each day tangled together in his bed that had become our bed. We told people gradually, carefully. My neighbor to the south, Mrs. Chen, figured it out when she stopped by and found me at Marcus's place for the third day in a row. She smiled knowingly and brought us a casserole. Derek, when Marcus bought the gelding and mentioned I'd be the one training it, congratulated us with genuine warmth and invited us to dinner with him and his wife. The feed store owner, the vet, the other ranchers in the area word spread the way it does in rural communities, through casual comments and knowing looks, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. There were challenges, of course. My ranch needed work that I couldn't afford. Combining operations with Marcus meant difficult conversations about money and equity and long-term planning.
आशिक हूँ तेरा राजा बाजार का, लगता है मुझको नशा ये प्यार का। आशिक हूँ तेरा राजा बाजार का, लगता है मुझको नशा ये प्यार का। मुस्कुरा के बात करती हो, आदतें खराब करती हो, ना दिखो बेताब लगता हूँ, आशिक बेहिसाब लगता हूँ। ऐसा नशा है तेरे दीदार का, आशिक हूँ तेरा राजा बाजार का, लगता है मुझको नशा ये प्यार का। जिंदगी हसीन लगती है जब ये जालिम प्यार होता है, सांसों में सांस आती है जब तेरा दीदार होता है। नखरा है ऐसा मेरी सरकार का, आशिक हूँ तेरा राजा बाजार का, लगता है मुझको नशा ये प्यार का। नखरा इसका टॉप पर आती है टिकटॉक पर, नैनो से है नैन मिलाती, लड़कों की है दिल जलाती, पिंडी में है चर्चा इसका, मीरा जितना खर्चा इसका। मैंने बोला इसको मेट्रो में बिठाऊंगा, कैपिटल ले जाऊंगा, F7 भी घुमाऊंगा, मोनाल भी दिखाऊंगा, सेंटोरस भी ले जाऊंगा। आशिक हूँ तेरा राजा बाजार का, लगता है मुझको नशा ये प्यार का। मौसमों की बेकरारी को आजमा के जान जाओगी, हिज्र की आजमाइश में एक दिन पहचान जाओगी। कहना है मेरे दिल बेकरार का, आशिक हूँ तेरा राजा बाजार का। लगता है मुझको नशा ये प्यार का।